So for public opinion and for gathering public opinion, polls are typically used. Okay, they often can be accurate, right? They can often show us where the public is on an issue, right? Where the nation is on an election issue, on candidates for an election, and so forth. Okay, but sometimes they can be wrong. Okay, so some issues are sampling bias, and that can happen because the sample is too small. So what a sample is, it's like when there's a public opinion poll, they don't ask every person in this country, right? That would be what, 320 million people, give or take, right? And so they need to get a population that would be representative enough for the larger population. Okay, so they need a sample size. So sometimes, if you can have a larger sample with more people in it, it's less likely that you're going to have errors in the sample, right? But what happens if you, let's say you do a poll, okay, and if you ask in this poll 100, men, right? And then you try to take that information, or more specifically, you ask 100, let's just start with that. If you ask 100 men and then you try to take from the responses you got from those and then apply it to the whole country, you could see that wouldn't be a appropriate application, right? Because the country's not all male, for example, right? If you go beyond that, right? If you're like only to ask Asian American women, right? You can't then extrapolate from the whole country because the country is diverse, right? In terms of gender, sexuality, education, race, ethnicity, right? So to have a more appropriate read, you have to have a more accurate sample size. So the larger the sample, the smaller sampling error. And samples and polls need to be chosen to be representative of the whole population. Again, to my point, right? So, for example, about 13% of the U.S. population are African Americans or Black, right? So to have an accurate poll, right, you'd want to have 13% and there, right, to try to get an accurate reading, for example. So another issue is that the sample is not random. So respondents should be selected based on clearly defined rules. So, for example, if someone did an interview or questionnaire just at your college, right, and then try to take what information gathered there and say, oh, this is representative of the whole United States, it wouldn't be appropriate, right? Because it's not a random sample, right? The whole of the United States is not in college or college educated, right? They're not in California, and so on, right? We can keep going to highlight why that wouldn't be an accurate read of the nation. We're going to think about how questions are even asked, right? Wording matters, right? Is it clear? First and foremost, is it clear, and how to avoid loaded questions for more accurate responses? Well, how accurate are polls? Often very accurate. They can often highlight the winner of an election, and more accurate. It can be more accurate the closer, that measure more accurate the closer it gets to an election. But there are also reliability problems in measuring public opinion, right? So if you're able to measure folks face to face, right, that is the best way of getting information. But it can be difficult to generate a random sample. And of course, think about COVID, right, as one of these reasons having to do these things differently. You could do random digit dialing, right? But a big problem with samples, right, is that they're typically conducted with landline phone numbers. So think about who you know in your community and how many folks have a landline at this point, right? And so consider how that would skew the results based on how you even reach out to people. Robopolls face criticism about sample selection. So if you get those like automatic phone calls, those are also critiques. And then there are big examples of things that examples that stand out, right? Like the 2016 election between Trump and Clinton, where the polls read that Clinton was going to win, right? But obviously she didn't, right? So then you have to unpack, well, what happened in those polls, or why did people say they were going to vote for her or didn't? What happened? You really have to unpack. Well, the polls all said X, right? And those are the expectations. So why didn't it shake out the way that the polls dictated? You think through the ways that the founders wanted political leaders to be both influenced by their constituents and also have a buffer from them as to avoid mob rule and to provide them with the autonomy they need for their jobs. I mean, this is the issue that the founders had to figure out as they set up government, right? How are they responsive to the population without, intimidation from the population, maybe? The suggestion is that, like, how do you have both a buffer while also being, like, actually responsive, which is particularly important in democracy, right? How are you responsive to the citizens? Okay. So given this, how much should politicians heed the public's opinion about political issues, right? They are affected by what the public has to say about things, but to a certain extent. And remember, they have that buffer. And it depends on what office they're in, right? If you're a senator and you're in office for 6 years, you've got more of a buffer in terms of time and also people's memories and so forth. If you're a congressperson and you were in office in 2 years, right? How responsive are you going to be to the public, given that you are basically going to be in election cycle like a year into your first year of work? You're going to be starting to campaign for re-election. So think about it. Given this, how much politicians heed the public's opinion about political issues like these? Polls and 2016 election predictions, as I just highlighted, right? This campaign between Clinton and Trump. I've got a link here about how polls got it wrong, and I will share that in the description box below. Election polls, a link to CNN exit polls, right? And looking at the difference here in terms of gender and exit polls of who voted for Trump and Clinton based on gender. And this is something to consider, right? This is called the Bradley effect, named after Tom Bradley, who was the mayor of Los Angeles, who was running for the governor of California. Now, the Bradley effect highlights that when Tom Bradley was running for governor, he polled really high, right? It looked as though he was going to win this election, and he lost the election. And they've called something like that the Bradley effect, right? So the difference between a poll result and an election result, in which voters gave a socially desirable poll response rather than a true response that might be perceived as racist. So what's the point here? The point is, did more folks say they were going to vote for Bradley than actually did, right? So as to not be perceived as racist? Well, I've got a link to a clip here for you to check out, and it's something to consider. You wonder if there, makes you wonder if there's a similar, what would be the experience, I suppose, of Hillary Clinton in 2016, right, where the polls showed her winning, but ultimately losing. Was there an effect there? The Bradley effect is countering